George. I'm the co-organizer of this meetup with Grace, who's walking away, and you guys all know what Grace is. We have an exciting topic tonight, something that I love to talk about and to hear about as well, which is lifelong learning. And I wanted to bring up Frank on up as our guest speaker. And he will introduce himself and talk a little bit about his background.
Great. Thanks so much, George. I'll get to that slide in a second, but so the first thing is, in case you're not sure what you are here for tonight, descriptively titled this talk. When you try to switch careers and you realize it's harder than you thought, because that's basically what happened to me. My name is Frank Z, and if you're wondering who's this guy, basically I've spent most of my career being a high school teacher, over 10 years. Then I'm a career switcher, decided, let me just try something different, right? I didn't hate teaching, but I didn't love it either. I just wanted to change. Was job hunting for a while. I guess you can kind of call that a profession. Because I was in that profession for, I think, over 7 months, a lot longer than I would like to have been. It was dark times. Currently a UX/UI designer at a really small early stage startup. So just that's the snapshot of my career so far. So what's this about tonight? Well, in case the first title wasn't descriptive, this is about barriers and insights about lifelong learning through the lens of my personal experience. So the highlight being my personal experience. There's a lot I could go on the internet and research about lifelong learning and give you a lot of lessons, but this is mainly through the lens of my own transition, what I taught my students as a teacher, and then what I try to actually carry out as I try to walk the walk of all those things I taught my students to be when they were being lifelong learners. My goal for you tonight really is just at least one takeaway. I know it doesn't seem very ambitious, but I've been to talks before where it's kind of like, okay, that's nice, but I didn't really have like a concrete takeaway. So I'll definitely present more than what you need for one takeaway, but hopefully there's, if you can just latch onto one thing and feel like, oh, let me implement that, then I will be ecstatic about that. Okay. We're going to start off with a short activity first. I want to kind of get an idea of what your thoughts are on learning and difficulties of learning. So one, I'm going to request that our fantastic Grace and Jesse and whoever else wants to help out there to pass out Post-its. So you will get a few Post-its, and on each Post-it, I guess you'll have writing utensils too. One idea for Post-it. Write 1 to 3 topics, skills, or traits you feel are things that can't be learned. And when I say can't be learned, it doesn't mean like, oh, no one can learn at all, but can't be learned as in like purely talent or inherent ability. And if you feel like, oh, everything can be learned, that's totally cool, that's awesome, great growth mindset. Try to think of maybe then what are things that other people might say cannot be learned. So again, when I say can't be learned, I mean things that some people might believe are solely based on inherent talent or ability. All right. If you're not done, you can just keep on working. Meanwhile, I'm going to give the instructions for the rest of the group. Next thing is there are, or will be, 4 posters. Find a poster and stick your Post-its near your respective side. Just stick your Post-its on the poster. I'm going to try to spread them out because you'll need to kind of be in a group around that poster. And with your group, analyze the Post-its that are up there. Look for maybe trends, surprises, or just anything interesting. Maybe you find like, oh, a bunch of people kind of put these similar things on there. Have someone in your group annotate. Someone can bring a marker with them, so you can label things like any of these things that you find. Go ahead and annotate it on there, and you can even affinity map it if you like. If you're into, you're like here to do UX, you can do that. And if you're not sure what that is, ask a neighbor. They might tell you what that is, and you can do that. After that, pick someone in the group to share the group's findings with the rest of the group. All right. So I'm trying to find connections between these. It seems like most of us agree, like physical stuff, right? Like, I probably can't add the extra 3 feet I need to become a pro basketball player, but also a lot of mental stuff, emotional, like empathizing, kind of a lot of soft skills, analytical skills, those kind of things. And whether they're true or not, it sounds like there is some sort of like pattern of that. A lot of us see these things as maybe like, I would like to learn that, but it's not really something you can learn. And so I want to connect that with basically barriers to learning. And sometimes those can act as barriers. Some of us have a very, some people call it growth mindset. You know, when you mentioned, Debbie said, you know, what if, like, so, to some extent, a lot of these, you know, if you put in enough effort, you can learn them, especially if it's something more of a mental thing. Some people would still say, yeah, no matter how much effort, I can't grow that extra 3 feet. So, sorry. But one specific barrier of learning is that some people think because of who you are, you can't learn a certain thing. And that could be really dangerous, whether it's true or not, because your excuse is basically, well, you know, I'm not a math person, or I'm not a programmer. And just by telling yourself that, you're the first person just to cut off your own possibilities. So basically you're saying that it's just something built in that can't be changed. And again, I'm not saying, oh no, you shouldn't believe that, because it's, you know, easier said than done. But it sounds like for a lot of us, we believe to some extent there are certain things that can be learned and certain things that can't be. And there are certain things about why you might think we're bad at something. And that's something I want you to reflect on. It's totally natural to think that you're bad at something. And honestly, maybe you are bad at certain things, right? I would say I'm bad at certain things. But I would challenge you to think about what that could be due to. And from my point of view, my experience, I feel sometimes it's just a culture. It's like, oh, everyone's bad at math, or it's almost cool to be bad at math. One example would be, again, math. As teaching, I would do a lot of students, and just even like watching YouTube videos when I'm trying to learn something, when the person who made the video is explaining something where there's an equation, suddenly they're like, okay, now watch out, there's like some math coming up, or like, okay, we've got an equation, like watch out, you know, and they're always commenting or like saying like, oh, okay, here comes the math, but don't worry, and they kind of almost mentally brace you for like this culture of like, yeah, we're all bad at math, we all hate math, we know, and so sometimes that could be sort of an influencer on us. Also, just going, I remember in college, I feel like it's part of your identity where I go out and eat with people, and then when the check comes, you like get the check and it's time to split the check. You're just like, okay, math major, who here's a math major? Just leave the check, right? Because like that's our identity in college. It's just like whatever your major is, that's your identity. And even when I was a teacher, same thing, right? You eat with teachers. Okay, math teacher, Wilson, okay, split the check. Just tell us, you know, how much it's going to cost at the end. And so that's again, I feel like it's kind of a cultural thing, even though it's probably 5th grade math or something, and we all have calculators. But for some reason, full-grown adults will just give the check to someone and say like, you know, because you're X, Y, Z, you should be the one splitting the bill for us. The other thing is that's kind of, oh, and also it's kind of cool to be bad at it, right? Like if you're good at math, it's kind of like when you're some nerd or something like that. So sometimes it's almost frowned upon. It's kind of like, yeah, I don't know math, because like everyone doesn't know math. And, you know, it's almost like a way to fit in. Same thing with being an introvert. And it used to be kind of like, oh, like the extroverts are cool, but now it's kind of, take for example, antisocial or social, right? Like apparently it's an actual brand. I didn't know that until I researched this last night. But like on one hand, it's like, oh, it's funny, it's ironic. But to some extent, it's kind of like, look, I'm kind of like, I just want to keep to myself. Right? I don't want to talk to people, and that's kind of like the hip thing now. I'm part of the antisocial social. So again, kind of could be sometimes cultural that kind of feeds these narratives in our heads of like that we're bad at something. Okay, next. Legitimately, maybe there's an actual experience of failure. Right? Going back to math again, right? Like maybe you just hated math class or you did poorly in math class. In my experience, it was I had to teach computer science, which I had learned in high school, but I was supposed to teach using Java. And in high school, I learned in C++. And it's not too hard to go from one language to another, but I still had to learn something to get from one place to another. And back then, you know, there wasn't like, I didn't know about Udemy and LinkedIn Learning and all these kind of things online. And I was like, oh, just go on Amazon, buy some good books. So went on there, searched a few, like this one's got like 100, like a few 100,000, 4 or 5-star reviews. This one must be really good. And I bought like a handful of books. They all arrived. I was like so excited, like I'm gonna learn myself some Java. And I opened them, and I like read some, opened another one, and opened another one. And I was like, these books suck. How come they got rated 4, 5-star reviews? And I realized it's a lot of people who already knew programming, who looked at the book and was like, yes, this is how you teach programming. They're really clear, concise, and if any of you tried to learn programming before, it probably looked something like, write a program that says like hello world or some message on the screen, and then you just copy it, and then you run the program, and then it prints the thing on the screen, and you're like, okay, cool. And then they proceed to explain the code line by line, what the code does. Which, you know, it being boring is not as much of a problem of like, that's just not the way a lot of us learn how to program effectively. And so nowadays there's actually a lot more like better resources, but I just realized kind of like, you know, if this was my first exposure to learning computer science, I would have just taken all these books and going like, if this is what good computer science instruction looks like, and I don't get what this is, well then screw this, I must just not be a computer programmer. I'm not a programmer, I'm not a computer science person. And so experiences like that could really have an effect on that shapes your belief about your relationship with that topic. Next stage, unfair comparisons. What does that mean? For me, becoming a UX designer, I come from more like a technical background. I taught science, computer science, and so for me to design something that looks good, that idea was pretty laughable like 7 months ago. And not to say this stuff I design now is beautiful, like these slides that I made last night. You know, I didn't put much effort into it. But when I started applying for stuff, like submitting my work and everything, I asked for feedback. Places would be like, oh, this is really great. It just needs more polish, which in other words means it looks ugly. So I took that to heart, and I was like, yeah, I know it looks ugly, but I definitely had some mental blocks. It's like, look, I'm the kind of person who makes ugly stuff. Like, it's almost like a point of pride. Like, if you're a developer, it's kind of like, yeah, it looks ugly, it's functional, you know? And I had to remind myself, like, look, the thing I told students was that don't judge someone based on just what you see. Like, I would say, okay, how about this? I'm gonna go on Dribble and find some inspiration. And those who haven't been on Dribble, it's like this site where people post all this beautiful work that's completely not functional, but it looks great. And it is really good for inspiration. So I went on Dribble, and I was like, wow, this stuff is like, it's so awesome. But at the back of my head, I was like, I'll never be this good. You know, like, why am I at this site? It just makes me feel like crap looking at all this beautiful work that I'm not going to be able to produce. And again, I had to remind myself that's the kind of thinking I would tell my students not to do, right? A way that some people put it would be like this iceberg illusion, where this is what people see, right? I go on Dribble, I see these beautiful things, but what I don't see is all the dedication, hard work, disappointment, sacrifice, failure, persistence, all these things that these Dribble authors had put in. Who knows how many years they had spent, getting the skills on Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever it is, and then all they do is plot these images on the screen. That's what I arrive at and go like, wow, these people are like gods, and here I am down here. And I had to say, you know what? I bet a lot of this went on. And some of it might have been talent, right? I had the same issues, like things like creativity, drawing, making things beautiful. I had those same mental blocks. And I had to say, admittedly, I don't think I actually could ever make something as beautiful as like top stuff on Dribble. But if I work hard at it, I could probably be, like, even if I was 25% as good, that is so much better than where I am right now. And so, what's the point in me sitting here and going like, someone's better than I am? Like, no shit, there's a lot of people better than I am, so why am I upset about that? Like, the idea is they put in a lot of hard work, I can do it too. And I would say I went from like really cruddy design to like, it looks okay. But to me, it's progress. Some recruiters would be like, yeah, it looks great. In my head, I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with your eyes, but okay, I'll take what I can get. And a lot of other things that might make you think you're bad at something. But the idea is, I think that leads to an action step for you, which is, it's important to identify that source of doubt, because it could be a lot of things that a lot of times when we say, oh, I'm bad at something, we kind of just take it for granted that it's part of who we are. But sometimes it helps for me to think like, oh, like I am bad at drawing and visual work. Why is that? Well, how much time did I spend trying to learn it? Oh, none. Okay, so that tells me I'm not like natural at it, but it doesn't mean that I can't be decent at it. And another action step is to rephrase your weaknesses so that they're not perfect. A lot of us tell ourselves things like, I'm not good at programming. Even if that's true, some people say, I'm not good at programming yet. Little hokey, little cheesy, but some people say it works. Or like, I suck at public speaking. Maybe you'll say, I haven't learned public speaking skills yet. You attribute it to action instead of this kind of implication that it's just part of who you are. Because if you just say, I haven't learned it yet, you're kind of saying like, well, I haven't done that yet, but who knows? Maybe if I actually put in some effort to learn it, I could be better at it. And finally, the classic, I'm not a math person. You might just say, I'm not comfortable with math. You're still honest, you don't like math, that's okay. But it doesn't mean part of who you are is someone who can't do math. All right, your turn. What I mean by that is, what I'd like you to do, let's do a practice one first. Let's say you are me, like, half a year ago, and you're like, I suck at visual design. So take a few seconds, think about how might you reword that in a way where you're still not lying to yourself, right? I wasn't like, I'm going to tell myself, I'm awesome at visual design. Right? But how can you take that and transform it into something where it's not as permanent? So again, take a few seconds, think about it, share with people near you, and I'll just ask for some random volunteers in about. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thanks for the helping gestures back there. Okay, is there anyone who wanted to share your own? Totally optional. Yes.
Public speaking is not a strength for me.
Okay, totally. Yeah, those are the ones I hear. The public speaking is a huge one. Yeah.
I gotta say, that was well.
All right. Any other ones? Yes.
I'm not the perfect parent, but
I'm
I'm
There's
not
more,
the
right?
perfect parent, but I will learn to become better of a parent through my children. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
She's the best parent. She's the best parent. Just putting it out there.
It's true. Okay, I've got the last minute. Okay, you can always share with us after the meetup. So something I hear often is like, I'm an introvert, especially talking about going to meetups and stuff. Along with public speaking, that's another one of the ones I hear, especially searching for jobs. People are always like, you should go to meetups, you might meet people, get connections and stuff, you should network. And one of the primary excuses people give is like, oh, like I'm shy or I'm an introvert. And I was talking to another friend, and she mentioned that she's talking to this guy, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm an introvert too. And she was like, no, you're not. You're a total extrovert. What are you talking about? He's like, no, I'm actually like really an introvert. I can just behave as an extrovert. She's like, that makes no sense. What do you mean? And he gave a great example. He was like, okay, here, cross your arms. So everyone, just go ahead and cross your arms in front of you. Okay, great. We can all do it. That's awesome. Nice. And she's like, okay. And he said, okay, now do the same thing, cross your arms, but the other way. So right now, if your right hand's on top of your left arm, then put the other hand on top. Right? It could take a while, right? It's like, most people are like, we just try to undo it and then do it again. We're like, no, I'm in the same place again. And eventually it's like, okay, and you can uncross your arms. And he's like, so were you able to do it? She's like, yeah. He's like, how does it feel? It's like really awkward and weird and uncomfortable, but you could do it, right? Well, yeah. And he was like, well, that's what it's like to be an extrovert, right? Like naturally, we say like, oh, I'm an introvert, but it doesn't mean you can't behave an extrovert, right? It's natural to do this, but it doesn't mean you can't do it the other way. It's just really weird and uncomfortable. I don't want to do it. And it's really similar that the more you do it, and I found the same thing like in the beginning, I'm like, oh, meetups, gross, networking, that's like a dirty word. First time I thought, I don't know anyone here, I'm just gonna stand by the food, I'm gonna like be on my phone, pretend I'm busy. But it's like after like many times of doing that, I learned to do things like how to talk to people like a normal person. I'm not 100% there yet, but I'm, for the most part, less awkward than I used to be, that I'm definitely more comfortable doing it than before. So speaking of comfort, Second barrier is avoiding discomfort. It's easy to say, hey, here's what you should do, right? You should go out and meet people and not meet and just fight the discomfort. But that's just naturally one of the challenges, is that doing a lot of things that we feel we should be doing is very uncomfortable. In my class, I would tell the students, like a lot of learning, you have to step outside your comfort zone. And so if this is your comfort zone, unfortunately, this is where a lot of the learning happens. And yeah, sure, there's a little overlap, and it's like barely noticeable that if you try to stay here all the time, you're not going to get that much learning done. And so it's really tough. And for me in UX, I still find this challenging because I see this in myself when it comes to usability testing. When I learn UX, it's so easy just to go like, I'm going to design something, I'm going to go like and read a Medium article, and like go on like Twitter and like look at all these best practices, and then I can implement that in my design because they're like best practices. And then I'm like, well, I should be usability testing with actual people. And I'm like, fine. Like, I have to go ask someone, and like I have to take up their time, and it's like sometimes it's like weird, and I have to have like a script and like know what I'm doing and stuff, and like what if I do it wrong? But like when I actually do it, even though it's not perfect, I come back with all these insights like, oh my god, like I totally didn't think that this thing was weird, but they totally made me realize how weird my design is. This is great, it sucks, but it's great because I feel like I learned so much. And so I feel the same thing with UX. It's like I want to be in my comfort zone and just read articles online, but looking back, like the most I've learned is when I actually go to real people and say like, do the whole like stupid script stuff and have them do this flow, and afterwards going like, oh, I totally didn't see that. So still working on it. If anyone wants to be usability testers for me, it definitely let me know, and that'll make it easier for me to ask you. And a quote from, it's either whoever, Peter McWilliams or the US Navy SEALs, either or. One way to put it is just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's always going to be uncomfortable. It's almost going to be like, even for me coming to meetups, like it's still a little uncomfortable, and if I just strive, if my hope is like one day I'll just be totally comfortable where I am, that's never going to happen because I'm going to have to learn new things and be uncomfortable again. So really, you just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Easier said than done. One way though, for your action step, is to make it a game. Now this doesn't work 100% of the time, but one example is rejection therapy. Has anyone is familiar with rejection therapy? Okay, a handful. Most people, you're not good, otherwise it's repetitive. Here's how rejection therapy works, is you want to go out there and get rejected by people. That is the point, is to be rejected. Because many of the times when we feel awkward, like I don't want to ask someone for a usability test, like I'm kind of afraid that I'll be turned down. And so the point of this game is like, you can think of it as you get points for being rejected. So if I'm like, I don't want to ask someone for this, I'm kind of like, but if they turn me down, then I get a point, yes. If they actually comply with my request and do the usability test, then I lost. That sucks. But then I got my usability test. An example of this, like I was talking about this with some friends, it was a group of teachers that we went to a conference, and this other teacher, she was like, oh, like, have you guys tried lotions? Like, these tiny lotions are like awesome. I don't know what brand they are, so I don't know where to buy them, but like, this lotion's like, skin feels so soft and stuff. I'm like, that's nice. Why don't you just ask them for more lotions? She's like, it's like kind of weird. Like, no, it's cool, it's fine. And in my head, I was like, rejection therapy. So I was like, how many bottles of lotion would you want? She's like, cool if I can get 10. And I was like, all right, it's gonna be super awkward. But we were walking in the lobby, and I like went up to like the clerk area, and I was like, hi, it's kind of weird. My friend really likes the lotions, and she doesn't know where to buy them. Is it possible for me to get like 10 lotions? And the person was just like, oh, which room would you like them sent to? And I let them know, and I'm like, okay, thanks. And afterwards, I was like, dang it, should have asked for 20. But at the same time, it was nerve-wracking because like this person's probably like, this weirdo is asking for a bunch of lotion. Like, yeah, it's for your friend. Of course, for your friend. Sure. Like I'm like thinking this the whole time. I'm asking that. I'm like, this person's totally judging me. But afterwards, it's kind of like it helps get that out of my system. Where I'm like, it was really weird and awkward, but kind of the more I do it, So you could probably make up your own game for stuff, but this would just be one example of a time where I'm like, this is an uncomfortable thing to do, but I'm gonna kind of make it a game and try to see if I can reject it. And I've actually done several things where I try to reject it. Pretty much all the time, the person's like cool with it, so I'm actually really losing at this game. Your turn. Okay, so what can or will you do tomorrow to welcome rejection? In other words, if you had to play the rejection therapy game tomorrow, what might you do? So it could be something that you were thinking of like, I always have trouble with so-and-so. And you don't actually have to do it, but maybe think of what's something that you could do. And then maybe tomorrow you might really feel up to it. And you could say, I will ask so-and-so for blah, blah, blah. Also, bonus points if you post this about your attempt in the SGVUX Slack channel. It would all amuse us. Whether the person says yes or if you get shut down, I would like to hear about it. So take a minute or so, and again, you can share with people near you if you like, and I'll ask around to share us for those who want to share. But what can or will you do tomorrow to welcome rejection? Does anyone want to share with us? And it's okay if you don't, but I thought I'd give you a chance.
You got rejection. So.
Here we go. I asked it, then you guys rejected me. That's good. Yes.
I just thought it took me a while to kind of piggyback on something. They go to KFC and ask if I can sample a piece of chicken.
Nice.
That was a refill at Starbucks.
Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah, I told my friend we were at a Cuban restaurant, and he's like, this place doesn't give enough rice. And I was like, why don't you just ask for some more? And he's like, that's like weird. And I told him about rejection therapy. Do it. And then he asked for rice, and they're like, yeah, we usually don't do this. Next time you should, you can pay more for extra rice, but the kitchen decided it was okay. Yeah, so it was like this big bowl of rice too. It was way too much. But yeah, ask him for free food. Any more? All right, we're going to keep moving. Okay. So then the next thing, well, what about imposter syndrome? Because that's another big thing on people's minds. I'm going to kind of talk about it instead of talking about directly how to address it. I'm going to start with, what is imposter syndrome? And yes, this is from Wikipedia, but it's good enough, so don't judge me too much. So most people know it's kind of like this fear of being exposed as a fraud, like you feel like you're not good enough. But here's the key thing. Despite external evidence of their competence. So I think most people are using imposter syndrome wrong because a lot of people are just like, I get so much anxiety that I'm not good enough. Well, maybe you're not. In that case, you're not being an imposter, you're actually just not good enough. Like, when I say that I'm bad at visual design, that's just true. That's not imposter syndrome. I'm not an imposter. I'm not designing beautiful things and going like, I suck at visual design. That would be imposter syndrome. I was bad at it, well, and still kind of currently bad at visual design. And so I wouldn't call that imposter syndrome. So the way I think of it, so that kind of represents this barrier to learning, which is thinking you already know. And it's a really kind of insidious fear, because you're like, well, it's not really a barrier to learning if you don't even know it's something you need to learn. It's like that old phrase, like, you don't know what you don't know. And it reminds me of this stages of competence thing that I saw that someone introduced to me, and then I totally misinterpreted it, and that's why this is a modified version, because it's my version of it, which is not scientifically validated in any way, as the little footnote indicates. So most people understand this, that, like, okay, let's say you suck and you know you suck. That's where people say, like, okay, I understand that. That's actually one tier above. You suck, but you think you're good. And when I started UX, this is where I was. But of course, I didn't know it because you don't know what you don't know, right? In UX, I'm like, I'm gonna be awesome in UX because I look at all these designs and I can see how these designs suck. I can totally tear apart this design. Like, put the button there. That's a stupid place to put a button. I should become a UX designer. I'm gonna lie. And then even in like boot camp and stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, persona, this is cool, whatever. And then it's not until I do things like usability tests and stuff, and I'm like, why don't they understand what I designed here? It's really obvious and clear. I followed best practices, and I start realizing, like, maybe I actually don't know that much. And again, it's hard to know because you don't know what you don't know. Beyond that, then let's say you get better, but you can actually be good, but you don't know what makes you good. You kind of just learn things and you apply things. But if you were to teach someone, you'd be like, I don't know, you just do it. Kind of like sometimes when someone who's talented, they might actually start here. Like computer programming, right? They learn 10 minutes and suddenly they're here, and you're like, how do you know how to do that? And it's just kind of natural for them that they're like, I don't know why you can't do it, just do it, right? But it takes a lot of really reflection and intentionalness to reach the next part, which is you know you're good, or you're good, and you actually know what makes you good. At that point, you can actually teach it because you can actually analyze someone else and say, here's how you can improve. This is what I do to improve. And on top of that, unfortunately, I would say, here's how self-confidence works. You think you're good, and then I'm pretty much right here right now, which it's like a dangerous place to be when you're like applying for jobs, because like you don't have that like cockiness to be like, yeah, like I deserve this $100,000 job, and you're kind of like, yeah, I'm still learning and everything, and so my take on it is most people mistake this for whatever syndrome that is, imposter syndrome, right? Where they have the lowest self-confidence at that point, but they're not really imposters because they actually suck. No offense. But so the takeaway for me is, let's say you are here, right? It's totally fine to acknowledge that I actually suck right now, and that's a really important step. So it's good to recognize that you're bad, but the important thing, taking into account those other things we talked about, that you also recognize that you can do better. That just because you suck right now doesn't mean you suck as a UX designer or whatever you're trying to pursue. So that you can do better, and that helps you actually put that work into doing better, to get from here to here. And at this point, now you can legitimately have imposter syndrome, because you are actually good at what you do. So I would say this is probably where imposter syndrome happens the most, where you're just kind of good at what you do, but you don't have enough like introspection to really identify, yes, this is what makes me good. You're just kind of like, I'm pretty sure I'm good, people tell me I'm good. So action item for this one, not as crunchy as the other ones, but I would just say overall just approach with curiosity. And in general, be humble and ask questions. So given that, if you, thanks for participating. Sharing out and everything and doing my little poster thing I made up. Thank you very much. If you need info, this is me. And if you want to follow up on rejection therapy or look up the original stages of competence, that's there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Frank. So we want to open the audience for questions now. I know you have some burning questions. There's a lot of content there. So any questions, raise your hand for Frank, or just even commentary on anything that you learned tonight. Anything that stuck, anything that you felt was really interesting, things that you heard the very first time tonight.
I saw a variation of that competence model that you mentioned. I think it was a Jacob Nielsen or one of those. Yeah, during school. Like he had spoken at one event where he talks about the 5 stages of incompetence, where you know you're competent, and there's also the unconscious incompetence, like you don't know that you don't know anything. So it was interesting.
Can you post that to the Slack channel?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Alex, you got a question?
Yeah, like, what advice would you have for people who get stuck in that you suck and you know you suck? Like, that can be its own little. That's kind of a good metaphor for you.
Nothing super, specific, but really just even just the fact that you can identify you're there is a great start. And just thinking about where you can learn from that. There's just so many places to learn stuff. I think it depends on what it is, but I think just recognizing that and having that attitude of like that, yeah, I suck right now, but doesn't mean that's part of who I am, right? So if you're just open to the idea that there's action you can take to improve, then just having that mindset allows you to move on and actually try.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll take this time. I think Grace will have a good question. but I think it's time to share what my neighbor, can I share that example? Ednar. We were talking about the inner voice that you play over and over about yourself being like, you're not good enough. So his was, I'm not great at technology or general technology. And what happened with him was that the thing that changed that voice was that he was given an opportunity to try technology. And then when he realized that he could actually do it, that's when the narrative and the voice changed. Because he was like, wow, I can do it. And then all of a sudden it went from, I suck at technology to, wait, I think I could do it. And then once the voice changed, the results changed. Right? So the way that I see that is that sometimes we have to be in community. Right? Because a lot of times it takes an intervention to change the inner voice is so strong with us sometimes, especially if it's negative, that it takes an intervention to say, no, either that's not who you are, or I'm going to give you this opportunity to try at least, and that can change your life. So, Grace?
I was gonna say that as a parent, I like to say that to my son a lot, is that if you don't know something, figure out someone in your group who knows a little bit more than you do and hang around with them. That way they can, somewhat give you some more awareness about what you don't know or do know, and then they can learn from each other. So like in our space would be like finding a mentor, and then talking with them, and finding other peers who maybe like in your eyes are a little bit better than know a little bit more than you do, or have more experience that way. You can gain a little bit more from each other.
You got a question back there?
Yeah, what advice do you have for people that are in
Ooh, that's you. Ooh, all right.
I feel like I'm just being really more like I think I know, but I'm not really sure. I guess ask people the pressure.
Like, just personal experience, I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like when I teach people, it helps me think about like what makes me good so that I can help someone else be good. So, I don't know. Teach someone.
The other thing I would say is look for external confirmation of those gifts, right? So like, you have to be listening for it, because a lot of times we're very, very quick to dismiss. Like when people might say, wow, this is really beautiful and you did it so quickly. It's just a napkin sketch, but how were you able to do it? You're like, no. Okay, right? You forget about it, right? But you have to be in tune with those, because those are cues that people outside of you are saying, hey, I see this in you, right? Because we're not a good gauge of our own skills. That's one of the big problems. We're horrible gauges of our own skills, especially if we have the inner voice that's always dismissing. So a lot of times you just have to be sensitive to what other people are saying and how they're speaking into your skills and into your life. Yeah, so Grace, I think you had a good point about how you suggested that your son move out to the community. I think it's great because everybody has an area of expertise, a hidden area of expertise. And none of us know about that, right? And so we have to be in community to figure those things out, right? And so everybody tonight has something that they're seeking, right? There's something to learn, right? That's one of the great things about UX is that it's so multidisciplinary. There's so many very specific things to learn that you could never be an expert in it, right? And so I think my takeaway from this is that there's always something to learn. What exactly is that today? Right? And so the answer to that might be in the person who's sitting right next to you, right? So we did have something else that we had planned, but I feel like we have so many people, like a lot of people here tonight. I want to leave some time. Is that okay? At least some time for networking. So thank you so much for coming, everyone. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.